Great. Hi, Aaron. Hi, Sergey. Hi, Vagiv. Welcome to the stream. And Vagiv, broadcast is yours.
Hello. Well, I could say good morning, but I know it's late night in States. Good anything. Hello, everyone. And I must say, I was really looking forward to this discussion because Aaron had a talk a couple of days ago, and we were recalling that DotNext was one of the first international conference who had talk about Akka.net. It was 5 years ago. And also Microsoft Orleans was represented many times in DotNext program, and actually Sergey was here with talks. But every time we had a talk about Akka or Microsoft Orleans, we always had a question. Okay, what do I choose? We're considering active model. It sounds interesting for our architecture. What do I choose? So, and that's not probably there is no better opportunity than to ask principal architects of respective products. So we are very glad that finally today here in our virtual studio we have both architects of Akka.net and Microsoft Orleans, Aaron Stannard and Sergey Bykov. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Agave. Good morning.
So we have a list of questions that we prepared. Also, we expect some questions from audience. So I think we have enough to cover the 75 minutes. We may adjust depending on what questions we will get. So the format will be simple. I'll be asking questions, and you two will have something like 5 minutes. I think to manage in time, probably roughly 5 minutes per answer should be okay. So let's begin with our little bit of retrospective, or maybe introducing yourself. You can say that last decade was a decade of growing popularity of active model. So the principles of active model, they were formulated about 50 years ago, but in around 2010, it was first public release of Akka and JVM. And then in 2011, Microsoft Orleans came, and then first Akka.net port, it came around 2014. So it's probably sufficient time long enough for retrospective summary. So as architect, what did you learn for yourself as architect and both major contributors of the product? And are there any features left out that you wish the product had? Or maybe anything that you no longer find important that you spent time implementing? So we'll begin, since Microsoft Orleans was announced before Akka.net, the first Sergey to answer, and then we will swap turns. So please, Sergey.
Okay, thank you, Agave. So I was kind of reflecting and thinking that, yeah, you mentioned the dates. I was thinking about the same, that Akka and Orleans started about the same time, not knowing about each other. I think the first time I heard about Akka was like maybe 2012, and I was like, what is that? So there are probably reasons why these kind of technologies became needed and popular over time. And I attribute it to the cloud, that the cloud and scale, those needs started to become a forefront for developers. Reliability, scalability, availability, all those, I heard somebody saying abilities instead of abilities or suddenly needed. And our industry is kind of notorious about reinventing the technologies again and again. So like you mentioned, Erlang was done in the 90s, and actor model is like from the 70s. The other thing I kind of reflected on was that sometimes when we build technologies, we don't even know where we're going. So we have a hunch, we have intuition that this might work, this might be interesting. And sometimes, like looking back, we find a name or a term for what we built, and we struggle with that. And that happened around like 2014 for us when we were trying to write this paper or publish in 3 top-tier conferences, and we're trying to formulate what we actually build. And so, say 5 years after we started, we came up with the term virtual actors, which was kind of the main innovation in Orleans, if you look back. So like we've been running in production, we work on it for all those years, and only then we realize what we actually built. So I think that was an interesting thing that oftentimes I think that we plan, we architect, we build stuff that we know where we're going and we know the end result. Then in reality, we actually look where we're at and we adjust and we rethink what we're doing and why we're doing it and change the ways how we do it. So I don't know if it answers your question sufficiently. That's kind of thoughts that came to my mind.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Aaron?
Well, I think Sergey hit the nail on the head in terms of my own journey into using actors. Sure enough, it was driven by a cloud project that I was building on top of AWS and ASP.NET and Apache Cassandra and a couple other technologies like Spark. And we needed to build what was essentially a real-time streaming platform for doing marketing automation. And now I know all the words for being able to describe this, but I didn't have the vocabulary to describe what I needed back in late 2013, early 2014 was kind of when I was working on this. And the term I would use today to describe what I needed was I needed a basically stream processing sort of state management system where I'm going to take a big stream of lots of tens of millions of click events coming from all the users using our company's analytics platform. And we're going to have a little state machine for each campaign a user could be in to try to determine what ad we should send them, basically, was what we were trying to build. I didn't have as primarily a web developer, I didn't have the language to describe what I needed. And what it turned out I really needed was the ability to very easily manage state inside an application behind the scenes. And so I started frantically Googling to try to figure out what it is I actually needed. Like I could kind of picture it in my head, but I couldn't describe it. And eventually, after enough at-bats, I finally discovered Akka. And this is like late 2013. This would be, I don't know, like October 2013, somewhere around there. And I took a look and I said, okay, the actor model is 40 years old. Surely there's got to be an implementation of it on .NET that I can use for doing distributed actors in a cloud environment. And at the time, Orleans was a project that I don't, Sergey can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it was available to the public then. I would have happily been an Orleans user back in 2013. And so I decided to go ahead and say, all right, well, Mom has a lot of experience building high performance applications on .NET. We do not feel like writing some of that in Scala is going to be a good fit for us. So we felt more confident porting this actor framework from Scala to .NET. And sure enough, there were some other members of the open source community who were already working on that problem sort of concurrently around the same time we were. So we joined forces and the Akka.NET project was born. A lot of things that I've kind of gone on to learn from the Akka.NET project. So one really important thing worth bearing in mind is like the Akka.NET project is not original. We are a port of the Scala project. So a lot of the designs that we implement are all translated from the work that the Lightbend team does on the original sort of Scala Akka project. That being said, that doesn't mean the work that we do is easy or trivial. In fact, there's a lot of things along the way that we've learned. And I would say the biggest one is that in order to build a sort of open source project that other companies and users are going to adopt, you have to bring this attitude of sort of treating your open source project like a product where you have certain industrial sort of expectations that you need to bring with you, such as you need to have documentation, you need to have some degree of backwards compatibility, you need to have some degree of release management and all that type of stuff. And so the project really changed quite a bit between the very first early releases in like the beginning of 2014 to, let's say, Akka.NET 1.0 in early 2015. That was where we sort of really professionalized a lot of it. The other things I would say, in terms of the actual, sort of, let's say, experience of working with actors themselves, being able to leverage actors as sort of a top level sort of, let's say, application abstraction, as sort of a fundamental way of thinking about partitioning state and work, and really partitioning and decentralizing the source of truth inside a big piece of distributed software opens up a whole bunch of possibilities for me and for a lot of other people who've used Akka.NET or Orleans. I imagine the same is true for them too, that you can start inventing all sorts of solutions for problems that would have seemed impossible now that you have access to the language and tools and a way of building a system that can be queried at runtime to go ahead and figure out where state is located inside your system. You have awareness of the topology of your network, so you know which node is assigned to, let's say, which partition of data and that sort of thing. And actors really kind of serve as a fundamental building block for doing a lot of those things in a distributed fashion. There's a lot that Akka.NET and actors can be used for outside of distributed computing for doing, let's say, like more embedded type programming, or maybe doing, let's say, eventing on a client like a mobile application or on a desktop app. But it's a total game changer in terms of just the way you look at how you can build software from before you learn about actors and then after you learn about them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for your answers. I think we can continue with also somewhat general question. It was actually a question which I would like to forward. I was recently asked, some developer asked me, do you think that developers talk less about actor model these days? It was a sort of high period, now it's stabilized, and some developers found it useful, some not. And I've never thought about this myself, because I'm using actor model like every day. So for me, it's never been like a question of being hyped or not. And actually, the more I use it in real world application, the more I regret that I wasn't introduced to actor model before, that I came to it relatively late, because I think that it's so great feat for modeling real world activities that actually I wish it could be used more. But maybe on the other hand, developers are less sort of focused on principles of classical actor model, especially like what Akka has, like you have a supervision strategy, hierarchies of actors, and maybe the stateful serverless functions also attract attention of some developers. So how can you comment on this question that for some developers it seemed that there was a sort of hype, many discussions around actor model, and now it's less. Do you agree, or can you add anything to that? Now it's Aaron. This is your turn first.
Okay. Well, I think the fact that the idea of the actor model becoming a boring technology because it's so well understood is an amazing transformation from where we were as an ecosystem from, let's say, like 5 years ago. And the fact that now .NET, let's talk about just .NET developers for a second. The fact that .NET developers have a plethora of tools that they can choose from, everything from, let's say, durable functions on Azure to, let's say, virtual actors with Orleans, to some of the abstractions that are like cross-platform actors using Dapper, for instance, or you got basic Erlang-style actors with Akka.NET. The fact that you have all those tool choices available and you can get a really professionally maintained code, and you can get a really sort of solid open source community behind any of those solutions is a wonderful place to be compared to where we were 5 years ago. So I think having an abundance of choices is a really good thing for the ecosystem and the community overall. That being said, I do think there is a degree of shiny object syndrome where .NET developers, not necessarily .NET developers, all developers gravitate towards what is novel and unfamiliar and exciting, right? And as technologies become boring, it doesn't, and I say boring in the sense of they don't make the front page of Hacker News anymore, which is probably a very poor measure of how exciting or interesting they are. But what that means, that doesn't mean that people aren't adopting them. It doesn't mean that the, let's say, rate at which those projects are being adopted is slowing down. It just means that there's fewer blog posts getting, let's say, upvoted to the front page. And maybe a lot more work is being done on, let's say, the relatively unsexy part of developing a technology, which is getting it actually adopted and getting people to use it at really large scale and going back and fixing some of the things you didn't do as well the first time, like going back and updating your documentation, your tutorials, and trying to make the ecosystem more approachable, trying to make it easier for new developers to get started, et cetera. So the way I kind of look at it is that there is probably less hype in terms of how you look around the ecosystem about the actor model, but there's a lot more people using it now. And there's a lot more places to get information about how to use it too. You know, I'm sure when, you know, in 2014, there were probably a grand total of 0, you know, Pluralsight courses on working with Akka.net. Now there's somewhere between, you know, I think there's a couple dozen of them now for working on it. And I'm sure the story is the same for Orleans too. And there's also, you know, code project articles. There's official documentation from the project. There's a whole bunch of people who've written their own blogs about it. There's probably thousands of Stack Overflow questions that all have answers now on all this stuff. And so part of a technology becoming mature, I think, means that it's also going to become a little bit less of a shiny object and more of sort of a reliable tool that actually can get real work done for your business.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Aaron. Sergey?
Yeah, so I want to make a couple of points. So one is kind of, I agree with what Aaron was saying. So kind of when technology becomes boring, that's what the world runs on. Like, the world runs on software. And that's kind of why I stay at Microsoft for so long, because wherever you go, you find software, some ridiculously old, still running in the grocery stores and airports. That software that was built maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that's what the world runs on. So I totally agree that when something becomes less of a shiny object, that's sort of a sign of success almost. Second point is probably like, I'm pretty sure it's controversial, but I was thinking about that quite a bit over the last several years. And maybe that's specific to kind of the Orleans case, because I've been trying to explain Orleans to many people. I'm talking at the conferences, talking to developers with various customers, partners. And I came to this conclusion, and a few years ago, I stopped talking about actors. I stopped using the term. And the reason for that was that my observation at least was that 90% of people I would talk to, they've never heard this term or they didn't know what it means. So actor sounds funny. It's kind of mislabeled technology. There's no acting there. It doesn't resonate. It doesn't connect to anything that they can think of. And the other 10% would be that they know about the actors, but in Orleans' case, they would immediately conflate with Erlang and Akka style. So that wouldn't help explain the Orleans either. So I was at this kind of no-win situation that I'm talking to either part of the audience. It's a kind of uphill effort to explain. And so if you step back, I think it's what Aaron was talking about earlier. Like, it's all about state management. Like, how do you express your state, or what is the programming model? How do you model your application, your system in your head? What do you like? What do you think? Like, what are the entities? What are the types of entities? What is the state? What is the evolution of the state? So the moment you think about that, they're really objects with some identities, either stable like in Orleans or created on demand. It's really about solving the problem. If we call them objects with these properties, that help, at least in my experience, helps to reach more developers than by kind of hitting them on the head with the term they've never heard of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Both frameworks, Akka.NET and Microsoft Orleans, they have quite strong developer communities. And last time I checked, if you take just core NuGet packages, so you are in the same league. It's about 2.5 million package downloads for the core package. And so there must be some strong feedback and probably influence from the community. So how does community influence product development? Or can you give some example of some community feedback when it changed your mind about something? Yeah, whoever wants to begin with the answer, please go ahead.
I can start. I think I envy Aaron that he started right away in open source, and we open sourced like kind of 5 years after we built initial technology, and that was probably the most amazing experience to go open source and kind of open it up and talking with the community, getting feedback and learning from them. Feedback sometimes is very direct, sometimes is very polite, but you learn to appreciate all of it. Like for example, when we just open source, we had this code generate factory classes, and the immediate feedback was like, it's just this code smells. Nobody does it this way. You should just have generic one factory that don't do that. I think it took like a couple of weeks to remove that and say, yeah, we agree with you. That was just stupid. Another kind of major change that we made pretty well, it took time because of the technology, but we kind of fundamentally we changed our mind soon, was that we build our links with this sort of Microsoft traditional approach. Oh, we know how to do it. We'll give you this package, this black box that beautifully solves your problems, and like everything will be integrated and work perfectly. And the feedback pretty early started to be like, oh, I want it to be very flexible. I want to inject my own stuff, like a dependency injection. Everything should be, and like initial reaction of typical Microsoft kind of person would be like, oh, why would you want like to customize all of that? What if it doesn't work? What if like you put some plugin that is misbehaving? But then you learn that to suppress that fear or kind of learn not to even fear that and say, yeah, when you open it up and people start injecting, that just helps everybody because they build extensions that you would never plan for or some functionality that you have no time to even think about. So we kind of had to catch up and shape the project after going open source and learn to embrace and foster a community. And that was a lot of joy that I personally got from working with the community all these years.
Mm-hmm.
On our side of the on our side of the fence, we've been open source from day one more or less, and it's tough to separate sort of what's a first party idea from a community idea in some respects. But I can think of definitely a few instances where if I think of, let's say, myself and like the other core developers from the beginning as like one entity, and then everybody else. In terms of instances where the everybody else crowd really influenced us, the earliest one I can think of were the async await wars we had during like early, but this is like right before Akka.NET 1.0, like early 2015, where people wanted to do async await and have a little async state machine inside an Akka.NET actor, and we thought, well, that's we already have an actor that can do state, and that this seems like you're just doing the same thing, but again, inside an actor. And I think the longest, angriest comment thread we've ever had in our history was on that issue. Eventually, we shortly after I think Akka.NET 1.0 came out, we caved. We said, okay, all right, enough people want this. We're going to go ahead and go to the drawing board and figure out how to really support it well. And lo and behold, it's actually a feature that like I use pretty frequently now. So I eventually came around to look at it from the point of view of a lot of the people in the community. That's one example. Other ones were things like a lot of people really wanted to use dependency injection, but they wanted to use constructor-based dependency injection, which they work for objects that are immortal in the context of actors here, right? You don't want to go ahead and inject a SQL Server connection into the constructor of an actor whose lifespan can be, months long potentially, right? So we went ahead and added some support for being able to make even constructor-based dependency injection work, and that was largely all written by a member of the community who was not part of the core team. And as DI and everything has evolved, particularly since ASP.NET Core came out, and we have these new sort of Microsoft.extensions libraries that are all kind of standardizing how DI, logging, and configuration are done. We're kind of trying to borrow some lessons from the community members in terms of how they want to work with those in order to try to make a better experience for having those tools interoperate with Akka.NET now. So we do get a lot of feedback along the lines of sort of what will help make it easier for Akka.NET to work alongside other technologies users are already working on. But we've also had lots of users contribute, let's say, plugins for doing, let's say, Akka.persistence, for instance. We've had people build visualization systems on top of Akka.NET, and we've even had one developer build a pretty intricate CQRS and DDD sort of system on top of Akka.NET too, and that open source project has, let's say, a few hundred stars at least, and it's been really kind of interesting to see. One of the things that we recently talked about at our sort of State of the Union of Akka.NET that we did a week ago was talking about how to actually go and foster more community involvement, and I think one of the areas where we decided that we really could do a better job is making it sort of clearer to people who want to contribute, what are the pathways to success there in terms of what are some of our standards for what we will and won't accept. And, because, if you want to go and rewrite our entire networking system to use some, crazy protocol we've never heard of before, someone's probably going to object to that in our user base somewhere, right? But being able to go ahead and lay out and say, look, there's a enormous space for being able to innovate and try new things and take some risks in hopes of trying to, let's say, deliver a better experience for people who are in the community or extend Akka so it can do something it couldn't do before. We want to go ahead and help everyone who wants to contribute to our project be successful. And so I think kind of one of the new growth areas for me personally, at least, in kind of my role in the Akka.NET project, is trying to figure out organizationally, how do we make that possible? How do we make it feasible for people to get more involved with the project in a way that's kind of driven not by, that's kind of driven more like as a function of an organization that has sort of, let's say, institutionalized knowledge, rather than just a handful of individuals who have a project they need to do for work and are willing to contribute a lot of time to get that done and then just go, disappear once it's done, which there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to try to build a more sustainable open source sort of movement that involves the community, you have to come up with a way to make it so other people can learn the ways of the force, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So it looks like sometimes even angry comments work, so they can influence in certain way the contributors. Let's move on to actual differences or choice between Akka.NET and Microsoft Orleans. And this is a question which at least part of the audience expect from us. And just to ask this question without context or scope, it's probably useless, because you can't really answer the question, what do I choose? But I think what can be useful, helpful for many developers, actually to help formulating set of requirements, set of criteria they need to come up when making a choice between such frameworks as Akka.NET and Microsoft Orleans. So judging from your experience, also from what community often asked you about the differences and choices. What would you advise developers who consider either Akka.NET or Microsoft Orleans to have as a checklist of a list of requirements before they make the final choice? Yeah. Anyone?
Want to go first, Aaron? No.
Well, sure, I'll go in first.
Yeah.
So in terms of, let's say, whether you're going to pick Akka.NET or Orleans, first I'd say if you're trying to build, trying to use actors for something that's not a cloud application, you're probably going to want to go with Akka.NET for that. It can scale down to support lots of non-cloud use cases. The area where Akka.NET and Orleans really are comparable is the distributed computing space. When you're building cloud applications that are responsible for distributing work, partitioning state, and really trying to build, let's say, modern, soft real-time applications. So, examples from that I'm sure us and the Orleans project have in common. We have a lot of developers that build things like foreign currency trading systems, doing banking systems for doing all sorts of stuff like real-time fraud detection, transaction clearing, models and simulations, asset line management, all that sort of stuff. In those sorts of spaces, here's what I would take a look at for Akka.NET versus Orleans. Orleans is going to provide you with a abstraction that makes it easier to get right into your business logic and into the parts of, let's say, your code that really drive your business. You're not going to have to spend as much time worrying about, let's say, serialization and persistence and some of the other infrastructure issues that you are going to need to deal with when you take a look at Akka.NET, for instance. So I think Orleans provides you with a abstraction that makes it very easy to build a reliable application quickly that will work in a clustered and distributed environment. Where Akka.NET offers a different set of choices, though, is that Akka.NET, I think, is inherently a little more, let's say, configurable in terms of the different knobs and dials you can adjust. You have explicit over actor lifecycle, for instance, is like one example of a difference. And that might give you the ability to say, okay, well, I want to go and spin up this little hierarchy of actors. I want to have them do this when they first start, and I want to have them do this when they shut down. And I want to be able to say when those actors shut down exactly. Doing all that in Akka.NET is fairly straightforward because you're honestly forced to do it from the beginning. Whereas with a tool like Orleans, correct me if I'm wrong, Sergey, I am 99% sure you have the ability to customize all that stuff if you want to start digging under the covers. But by default, you're not supposed to necessarily need to get into the details of how that works. That's because Akka.NET and Orleans are trying to solve really similar problems, but we're doing it from different points of view in terms of where we think developers should start in those cases there. So with a tool set like Akka.NET, if you're really concerned about, let's say, managing performance and throughput from day one, Akka.NET's going to gradually sort of introduce these trade-offs where you say, okay, we're going to give you a really simple set of defaults that are very fast out of the gate, but you're not going to get things like message deliverability guaranteed for you out of the box. We're not going to go ahead and do a deep clone of every message that gets sent around in memory. We're not going to go ahead and automatically persist things for you. You have to opt in to parts of Akka.NET to tell the system to do those things. Whereas, in my opinion, the Orleans approach is kind of oriented the other way. It's going to give you a very robust and reliable system, but you're going to take some performance hits as a result of some of those changes down the road there. So I think that both technologies can be very successful working with either of them. It's really a matter of, let's say, what is valuable to your organization from like right out of the gate. Do you need to build, let's say, a really large cloud system where you need to worry about, let's say, guaranteeing delivery of all of your events from your ingestion pipeline to the entity actors that are going to be responsible for owning the business state? And is that more important than, let's say, the total end-to-end throughput of that system? If that's the case, then I think Orleans would be a very good technology for you to look at for that case. If you're building something like, let's say, a system that's responsible for processing, let's say smart power meter data for 40 million homes spread out across, let's say, 5 or 6 different European countries, and you have some throughput deadlines for how quickly you need to do certain things in order to meet your business requirements, Akka.net might give you a more tunable solution for doing those things. So I'm never one to go ahead and suggest that technology A is better than technology B, because I don't think that's a very practical way of kind of looking at these differences. I tend to think more about like what are the defaults that the system has and how closely does that align with the way I want to go about developing a piece of software. And that tends to be sort of how I think about things. And I think really where the defaults between Akka.net and Orleans are different out of the gate is that I think Orleans provides a very robust set of abstractions that offer you really good, sort of reliable and predictable behavior, whereas Akka.net doesn't make those same guarantees, but offers you a very high performance, simple, and a fully under your management sort of approach out of the box.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sergey, do you have anything to add or object?
I think there are two factors, like two classes of factors. One is like the scenarios and requirements of the application. For example, things like how do you want to handle your failures? Like, is there some structure that you need to assemble? And then if something fails, you would prefer to kind of drop it all, recreate, because that's how you handle consistency and make sure there is no like in-between state somewhere down your processing pipeline, right? So that's a thing that may be asking for a supervision tree, or if you prefer like one-way messages, like I think it's called tell, right? And Akka,
Yep.
The other one is ask, like versus RPC. Then the Akka.net, Erlang, the same thing. They encourage you to kind of push messages like one direction and don't expect to wait for like a response to come back within the same call, right? And I had this discussion, fortunately, with late Joe Armstrong. Like he was a very big proponent of that. So it's this scenario part there, but also like speaking of Joe, it's also the developer preference. Developers are different kind of animals, right? So some prefer to assemble like from the small pieces and build their simple solution has just the pieces they want. And other developers want to get hit the ground running and get the application running right away, and then figure out, how do I tune it now? Where are the knobs? But first, I want to see it working end to end. So on the scenario side, Orleans, like with the virtual actor model, is, in my opinion, is more suitable for this kind of flattish hierarchy where no hierarchy, where you have these entities that have stable identities, like the user accounts or device IDs, and you program like in this virtual address space. So you don't build any kind of structure. You just semi-naively program as if they all like in the memory of a single machine, even though it's spread across clusters. And kind of that's the opinionated choice of the Orleans abstraction. Mm-hmm. It reminds me, like early on when we just rolled out Orleans and started talking about it publicly, there was like a lot of confusion because of this difference in the model. Some people were claiming, this is not even the actors. Like you misunderstood the actor model. And it took some time for Carl Hewitt to write in his paper that, he admitted that this is the step of the actor model for the cloud, kind of this virtual actor extension. It reminds me, I think early on, Roger Johansson, who was Aaron's partner at the time, he posted this kind of comparison in two funny kind of cartoonish pictures. One is like Lego blocks sprinkled on the floor, and the other one was like small Lego cars moving. His point was, with Akka.net, you can assemble from these pieces, low-level pieces, what you want. with Orleans you get this car going, but kind of it's the shape that you're given. I mean, then you can disassemble and start changing pieces. I thought it was kind of a funny analogy and comparison. But of course, like it's software. Like anything can be done. Any problem can be solved with pretty much any technology if you work hard enough. It just what fits better for a scenario and what fits better to the developer's state of mind or skills.
Just for me to clarify, is it correct that actually in Orleans you get you don't need to opt in for guaranteed delivery of messages, so that you get them out of the box. So this is how Orleans work.
You need to define guaranteed delivery for me, because what exactly?
Well, at least one delivery.
Oh, in Orleans it's at most one, so we don't retry.
Okay, so it's like an Akka. So by default it's
okay.
But you get a promise. Like in every call you get a task, a promise back. So you'll get either a response or an error, which may be a timeout. So like we push people towards, for most calls, expecting a response. They can also do one way, but that's kind of secondary mean for it's not the primary way of doing it.
Okay, so default behavior of both frameworks is you get at most one delivery, because this is often when people ask when they start comparing the systems. Aaron,
that's my fault. I misunderstood that.
I think probably the reason you misunderstood because there was some very ambiguous language, like one sentence really in the paper that kind of makes people think that way. And I think we made a mistake and formulated in the 2014 paper on virtual actors. So you're not alone there.
Documentation is hard.
Okay. Yes. Okay, then it's good that we get it sorted out. So next question, actually you probably already answered, but you may add something if you want to. Because already in 2015, there was a comparison published between Akka and Orleans. It was published, I think, on the not Akka.net, but this original Akka JVM at the GitHub pages. It was comparison of that Akka with Orleans, and a quote from that comparison was, the primary focus of Orleans is to simplify distributed computing and allow non-experts to write efficient, scalable, and reliable distributed services. Akka is a toolkit for building distributed systems, offering the full power, but also exposing the inherent complexity of this domain. I was a bit provoked by the word non-expert, but okay. And then I can also quote, it's probably very much oversimplified, but I once watched a talk by Ukrainian developer and speaker Anton Moldovan, and who used both frameworks, and asking this question, he said, okay, in simple words, Akka is C++, while Orleans is C#. So can you please comment on this? If you need to comment.
I remember the comparison. It was written by Roland, where we have very friendly relations, and we collaborate on J and the Beach a few times. Yeah, I think it was part of this kind of original reaction, like, oh, this is like not the actors people are used to, and like, I mean, to be honest, I don't consider that comparison there kind of fair statement, but I think there is truth. Non-expert can be viewed as a kind of positive or negative, right? If it enables more developers to build reliable distributed systems, I think it's a positive. Like if you limit the domain to distributed system experts, then kind of we're not progressing as an industry. But it can also be viewed, oh, this is like Visual Basic, which is not true. It's just the matter of what people, like meaning people put in words, right? If you phrase it differently, it would not sound as kind of controversial.
Aaron, anything you would add?
Well, I think that what Sergey and I kind of covered in the last section really addresses the differences. Is that Akka.net's a toolkit that exposes, I think, a I think the right way of phrasing this whole expert versus non-expert thing is how much before you can actually get, let's say, a business-worthy application into production, how much infrastructure level stuff do you have to worry about? And I would argue that a toolkit like Akka.net exposes you to more of that up front than Orleans does. And as a result of that, you get, let's say, the full power of actors, which means you get a lot more control over, let's say, the supervision model and that type of thing and how you deal with failures. But you're going to spend more time having to reason about how you want to do those things. There's a lot more things for a developer to have to consider in order to do that. Whereas I think Orleans offers a model out of the box that is, tailored, of course, to, let's say, the sort of the preferences of its designers originally, but it offers a set of, let's say, good enough defaults that'll allow a lot of developers to be successful and happy and get up and running in production relatively quickly. So I kind of view Orleans not as a visual basic for the cloud, as we were joking just now, but I really view it as like, if you want to get into the business of distributing objects in state without needing to know about where they are, without needing to worry about managing their life cycle, and you just want to have the ability to go ahead and say, whenever I need this object, I want to send it a message and know that it can send me a reply back. Because we'll go ahead and recreate that actor if it's been garbage collected because it wasn't used for, let's say, days or weeks at a time. It can go ahead and get reactivated, rehydrate its state, send me a message back, and then get garbage collected again to be used maybe again at a future point in time, days or weeks later. Orleans offers a model that'll do all those things for you without you needing to. You shouldn't necessarily have to be able to dig in. You shouldn't necessarily need to dig into the details in order to get an application going in production. Akka.net exposes some, let's say, functionality that's real similar to that. Akka.cluster sharding is kind of our module. It kind of does a lot of those same things. But again, as with sort of the differences in terms of the development experience, there's a bit more learning curve to doing that with Akka.net. It's my opinion. So as Sergey said, really, I think the biggest differences that you're going to get between Akka.net and Orleans, it's not that one type of application is impossible to build with the other. It's more of what is your preference and what are your requirements are going to sort of dictate which one's a better fit for which project.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just add an example, exactly what Aaron was saying. In terms of sharding and placing based on shard ID, you can have hash-based placement. That wasn't in Orleans from the beginning, but eventually got added as an option, as a pluggable component. This is where like Orleans is moving towards customization and adding these things over time, going kind of from just this is like a set of defaults versus in Akka, that's the option that was there from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Maybe both projects will do this.
Remember we were talking
time.
In DC, Sydney, like about brainstorming, maybe like using some of the underlying layers and reusing the cluster membership.
If you don't focus on team preferences, developers' experience, language preference, and so on, but just by looking at different domains, can you maybe specify that certain domains like finance, banking, online trading, industry are under certain conditions are better fit for one or another framework? How would you answer to that?
I have no idea.
Or it's too broad. You need to actually have concrete project requirements, you can't really apply it without knowing specific requirements that, okay, in general, some banking applications would benefit from A or B. So
I think we could hand wave and say, oh, like financial things are more well structured and defined. So maybe Akka is the better, like with the topology, the hierarchy, versus like gaming is very dynamic and like unpredictable who's ends up where. But I think you would not be really fair because you can express the same requirements in either of the systems. So like it doesn't strike me that there is a clear preference from the application domain.
Yeah, fair enough. Do you agree, Aaron?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, like, so the original use case that kind of sired Orleans was Halo, right? For building all the Xbox Live services behind it.
That's actually popular misconception.
I read it from your guys, man.
Yeah,
but
well, so let me tell you what actually happened. So we were tasked. We were in this research lab, which doesn't exist anymore. Got merged into Redmond lab of MSR. So we're tasked with looking at how to build this new way of building applications for cloud as it coming. It's like around the corner. It's happening, and we're trying with different things. Like, can we build MapReduce with this? Like, okay. Like it was a project like that. At some point, we built like a Twitter-like thing and showed that internal like tech fest. Oh, here's Twitter core functionality written in 200 lines of Orleans code. And what happened, almost like by accident, Halo people, like a newly formed 343 division of Microsoft Game Studios, they learned about Orleans, like drinking beer after some unrelated event, and they came to us and say, hey, actually we like what you have. That's kind of what we wanted to build, but you only build most of it. Let's ship it in 3 months. And this is where we're like, oh, actually maybe we should work for gaming. And actually in that 3 months collaboration, the virtual actor model kind of happened because our initial API was just like traditional, like create grain, delete grain, look up grain. And what we're discovering in real application, you had to write, oh, look it up. If it's not there, create. But then there is a race. So we ended up adding a method, lookup or create. So like, either find it or you return. And then I'm like, why do we need this method? Just get. And that's how you always get it, regardless whether it's already there or not. So it literally happened in that short span of initial collaboration with Halo folks. But then after that, Orleans was associated with Halo forever.
Well, makes for a good origin story.
We have a question from. Sorry, yeah. Continue, please continue.
The reason why I brought that up is like, if you come at the idea of choosing between Akka.net or Orleans from a domain model perspective, it's like, well, Orleans was built for games, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's like, well, Orleans is also used in a ton of internal Microsoft services. And I think you have customers like, I thought I saw a use case with like Visa using it inside their network somewhere a couple of years ago. So Orleans is a tool that does serious work for lots of different use cases. And the same is true for Akka.net. Like as Sergey said earlier, you can solve any problem with software, right? And it's really just a matter of I think really does come down to the preferences and the style of the people who are using it, not necessarily the domain in which it's being used. You can get the job done with either tool.
And I would make the statement even stronger. Not frequently, but sometimes we see application systems built that we would not suggest to build with technology like Orleans. Just some developer got excited and was very passionate about technology and decided to build everything that way. So like you get examples of that as well. I'm sure you've seen the actors being used
the same thing.
There's no reason for them.
Yep. I think the line that I've used with some of our customers before is you don't want to build a content management system with actors. It's like ASP.NET over a database will probably get that job done just fine. You know.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from the community. Did you feel any restrictions coming from the language? If so, what are they and what language you would use if you could? And that reminded me actually the talk at NDC Oslo by Roger Johansson. At the end of the talk, there was a question from audience. Don't you think that Erlang is better fit to what you just presented? And he actually agreed. He said, "Oh, any day, I would choose a language like Erlang to do this stuff." So, what your comment on using your particular language to implement your framework?
I'll dive in. One of the things we wished that we had had from day one in C# would have been pattern matching, which we do have now. So that's kind of the core of how you write these message handlers inside your actors, right? So you want to go ahead and match on the incoming type and its content, and then figure out which code to run. So F#, which had all those things at the time we were developing Akka.NET, may have looked like a better fit potentially than C# did. My philosophy at the time I was doing it, because I was building Akka.NET to create an internal product inside my company, I had zero intention of launching a big open source project. That was a totally accidental thing that happened afterwards. And I'm not going to we're a startup that's burning cash. Back in 2013 when we're doing this, I'm not about to retrain my engineers on how do do functional programming in F# for you working with some actor tool. Doing everything in C#, we could go ahead and get all the experienced .NET engineers on our team up and running with it right away was job number one. And so kind of shaping Akka.NET by taking all these sort of Scala concepts and trying to reshape them as C# idioms seemed like the shortest path between where we were and where we needed to be when we were first working on it. And in the grand scheme of things, I'm really glad that we do our work on Akka.NET in C# because that gives us the broadest platform in terms of why we do what we do on the Akka.NET project and at my company, Petabridge, is ultimately what we really care about is giving .NET developers tools that allow them to solve difficult problems on our platform. We're very proud to be in .NET. It's an ecosystem that I've been working in for most of my entire career. And I think that using C# gives us kind of the broadest addressable reach. There's a whole bunch of nice things that F# has. I've looked very jealously at some of the language features in platforms like Clojure and Scala before. But that being said, I think that part of what made our work so interesting back in the sort of the original sort of early days of Akka.NET was the fact that we couldn't find a lot of examples of this type of actor programming in C# in production anywhere back in 2013, 2014. So no, I feel like we picked the right language for the job. And now that my job has kind of evolved to, let's say, building a sustainable sort of open source ecosystem, I definitely feel like C# is the right language for us to choose, given that we cater to the CLR.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'm thinking like when we started, C# was in .NET was in a very different shape. There was no like async await. Their tasks only supported callbacks or continuations. And it's interestingly enough, like when we were in that research lab, Nicholas Gustafsson came and gave us a demo prototype of this new features he was trying to convince Anders Helsberg to implement, which became async await. So I think Nicholas is probably least known hero of .NET world. He actually pushed for that. And so we had our own promises, like these wrappers that would wrap tasks and then do all this stuff. And then we had to switch to tasks because they, after like .NET 4 or 5, finally supported this new paradigm. So it's interesting, like the language changes, and but then there was a big shift with .NET Core, where suddenly all these fast, very like fine-tuned pieces of software started to appear, and then extensibility points, and all this thought out interfaces. It really made our life much easier, but years after we struggled to solve the same problems with writing our own code. Like we were chatting before it started about the thread pool. The one thing that the downside, and now it's kind of painfully obvious when I'm on the other side of the fence, is because .NET is the ecosystem of its own, it's difficult to expand beyond and support different languages. I think the challenge is to have this kind of polyglot experience, which ideally we want to have, but it's kind of difficult to think about how to run Akka.NET on JVM or Linux on JVM or like Go, like the language I got exposed to recently. I don't even know how to interop with this other languages. Mm. And when it comes to Erlang, I think there is a good community, like in some spots, like in London, it's probably easy to hire Erlang developers, but like in Seattle area, I think it's much harder.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be able to hire Erlang developers in Houston, Texas. Like we don't have there's all legions of C# and Java developers here, but I don't think it's like one of the you have to think about when you pick a technology platform is like how easy is it going to be for you to train people on it or hire people who already know it, and that's one of the big drawbacks of a platform that is very purpose built like Erlang, but unfortunately. That's kind of a double-edged sword. There's not that many people who've had a purpose for it before, compared to, let's say, a general purpose virtual machine like Java or JVM or CLR.
I also think we kind of have this unusual luxury where the market is so big and the opportunity is so immense to build various kinds of software. There's really no competition between any of these technologies or languages in reality. People may think there is some competition with technology X or no, like you're serving different market and different set of customers, and everyone is happy whether they use this set of technologies or those technologies. It's like tell that to car manufacturers or other industries. We're spoiled.
Absolutely. We've got
we have yeah.
Go ahead, Vigif.
Yeah, just want to say that we have around 10 minutes left. We can continue then in the discussion zone. But in this remaining 10 minutes, actually, I wanted to ask you somewhat personal questions, because both of you have, Sergey recently left Microsoft and started working for Temporal Technologies, and you didn't leave your Peter Bridge Iron, but also you have a new adventure, which is SDK bin. So can you just in a few minutes summarize the reasons for doing what you did and what are your expectations about that? So we begin with Sergey.
Yeah, I wrote a blog post about because people, when the moment they learn that I can change job after so many years in a big company, and why would I leave such a good deal there? So I wrote a blog post to explain kind of how I arrived at that decision, and a big part of it is I saw the opportunity to work on what I've seen emerging more and more in applications, like either my team build or other teams build with technologies, like this need to manage longer running workflows and all this like coordination where you allocate the virtual machine and then you need to deploy some bits and then you need to start. So things that don't really fall into kind of traditional low latency requests. And that's kind of the opportunity I saw was interesting, especially because the co-founders were kind of very respected by me. And then after that change, like I'm kind of exposed on both sides of the fence, seeing like .NET world and not .NET world, and it's interesting. I'm still kind of trying to absorb it and analyze, and hopefully contribute to both sides of the fence over time.
Mhm. Thank you. Aaron?
So SDK bin is a new service that we launched on September 30th. It's basically the App Store meets NuGet is what it is. And we built this because one of the things that we've been trying to do at Petabridge, so we're open source company. So our business model has historically been selling services and primarily like training and consulting and support all around Akka.net. That's been how we've been funding ourselves for past, I guess it'll be 6 years in January. And that's been successful for us, but it's very difficult to grow a business on the backs of really specialized services like that, because the amount of time it takes to train and hire people who can deliver that really high touch service to someone, it takes a long time, years, to really get someone to that level. So obviously the better route for trying to grow a software business when you're doing it bootstrapping, like we are, is by selling products. That way you take all your research and development costs, you amortize it, and you sell it over and over again with each new customer that you get. We launched a product in 2018 called Phobos, which is a APM suite for being able to trace and visualize activity that's happening inside your Akka.net applications. And we learned a lot about how much it sucks selling proprietary NuGet packages to people. That it is not very easy from a fulfillment standpoint in terms of all the stuff that has to get managed. If you want to use a trial system like how we did, it can be very awkward to manage that. And then there's also the life cycle sort of billing of renewing it. There's also sharing access. And there's just a lot of problems that go into actually doing sales and fulfillment in that business. So we decided that we were going to invest into building a platform that can automate a lot of those problems for developers. Allow developers to essentially sell libraries or license keys for standalone, let's say, applications, or even sell services like support plans. And we would have a platform that would take care of the recurring billing, being able to make sure multiple members of our customers' organizations all have access to those products, and then also being able to get some analytics on which parts of your products your customers are actually using. So, if we sell half a dozen NuGet packages, we want to know which 2 or 3 each customer uses in each one of the subscriptions that they get. So SDK bin is right now a platform that we're using primarily only really to sell our own products. Our hope is we want to go ahead and allow anybody to sell any type of software product on there, whether it's a NPM package, Rust crate, or maybe a license key for a Windows desktop application that you wrote. And so that's going to be a big journey for us. We might eventually go ahead and spin that out into its own company if we're successful there, because there's a lot of operational crap that goes with the business like that is not very exciting from a software development standpoint, such as dealing with international taxes, for instance. But the goal is ultimately, like, we want to go ahead and have an easy path for selling our own products, to develop more of them. My primary focus is, sadly these days, less on software development and more on building a software development organization. So I'm constantly thinking about how do I make revenue predictable? How do I build up our organization with the right people in the right seats? And how do I become the type of manager and sort of a leader who can go ahead and do that? And I view SDK bin as it allows me to focus less on emailing out NuGet keys to the right 7 people, my customer's organization. It allows us more on things like how do I write, let's say, better tutorials and marketing and hire the right people and that sort of thing. So it's a long answer, but nope, we're not going anywhere. We're going to keep working on the Akka.net project, and we're going to go ahead and do this other thing too. So yeah.
Thank you for your answers. I see that we have less than 4 minutes left. Probably there is no room for asking more questions in this virtual space. We will need to move to another virtual space. I just need to thank you for participating in it. We already received some feedback from folks saying that they appreciate the discussions, and actually with everyone sort of complaining about not having this physical conferences where people can meet and see each other on premise. I think that probably this format which we use today, it was a rare opportunity actually to have such discussion, because chances that you both would come to the same DotNext conference and were able to participate in offline event, they are pretty slim. So actually, this is a virtual format. It made this possible, and so we are, as organizers, very grateful for you that you were able to attend it in the middle of American night.
It's Friday.
Oh,
it was.
Yeah, it's Friday night. I already had my bourbon a minute ago. Yeah, I'm ready to talk about .NET stuff. That's what I like to do at 3 a.m.
Okay. Yes, I think actually, if we manage with a couple of minutes, somebody just asked if there are any recommendations about books about Akka.NET or Orleans. If anything you can recommend, maybe not just books, but any resources you would recommend. Just quickly, because we have less than 2 minutes left. Anything which comes to your mind?
Roland Kuhn's Reactive Messaging Patterns book. He's one of the original Akka architects. I think it's a really good one. And just in terms of the types of like messaging styles and that sort of thing, I think that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't believe there is any book on Orleans. We're talking with the publisher, but considering how much work that is, there's no time for that. Really write one.
Right. Writing technical books does not pay very well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if it was like a month worth of effort, that would be okay to do it kind of pro bono, but it's much more than that.
Yeah, it is much more.
It is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, then I think we just wrap up in this room, and I see there is a link to Zoom discussion where actually when people who join us will also be able to ask their questions. So Anatoly, the word to you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for this amazing talk, and waiting you in discussion zone.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.